On March 14, 1911, 300 people vanished from Cala, Peru. They didn't die. They didn't run away. They didn't leave bodies behind. They simply stopped existing from one moment to the next, as if someone had erased their presence from reality. When the railway mapping expedition arrived at the village that afternoon, they expected to find 300 residents. Instead, they found 300 houses. Pots still on the fire, warm to the touch. Clothes hanging on lines, swaying in the wind, tools leaning against walls as if someone had just set them down to get a drink of water. But no people, no bodies, no signs of violence, panic, or flight. Doors stood open, tables were set for lunch, food sat on plates, still fresh. Bread split in half, the knife resting beside it, coffee spilled into puddles that hadn't dried yet. Everything pointed to a sudden, brutal interruption, as if 300 people had been ripped out of their everyday gestures in a single second. And yet, there were no signs of struggle. No overturned chairs, no broken objects, no marks of resistance. The chief engineer, Thomas Harrington, was 42 years old and had 17 expeditions across South America on his resume. He had survived malaria, landslides, jaguar attacks, and a bout of yellow fever that killed half a team in Bolivia. He had seen men die in every way nature allows, but when he entered Cala, his right hand began to shake. That night, he wrote in his journal, "In every death I've witnessed, there was logic, cause and effect. Here, there is nothing, and that is infinitely worse than anything I have ever seen." Because Cala hadn't been abandoned. Cala had been emptied. As if something had arrived, selected each person individually, and removed them from existence with the surgical precision of something that knew exactly what it was doing. Cala sat at 12,500 feet above sea level in the Peruvian Andes, on a commercial route between Cusco and Arequipa. It had 300 permanent residents, mostly Quechua, with a few mixed heritage families, an economy based on terrace farming and llama herding, a small colonial church built in 1680, a school with 23 students, nothing that would justify a mass abandonment, nothing that could explain an evacuation without warning. The expedition had left Arequipa on February 28, 1911. 12 British engineers, 28 Peruvian laborers, 3 interpreters. Their objective was to map a possible route for expanding the railway line. Cala was marked on their maps as a mandatory stop. It had a freshwater well and granaries where supplies could be purchased. The last caravan to pass through had been 6 weeks earlier, on January 29th. At that time, everything had been normal. The village was functioning. People were buying, selling, talking. When the expedition approached on the afternoon of March 14th, the first sign that something was deeply wrong was the silence. No dogs barking, no sound of voices, tools, or animals. Only wind cutting through the stone and adobe houses. And a smell. Not rot, not death, but freshly prepared food mixed with something else. Freshly turned earth. As if someone had been there minutes earlier, cooking and digging at the same time. Harrington reined in his horse 50 yards from the first house. He felt something he hadn't felt since childhood, the urge to turn around and run without looking back. He had promised his wife this would be his last expedition, that afterward he would return to London, accept a university teaching position, live a normal life. But in that moment, staring at Cala, empty and silent beneath the afternoon sun, he knew nothing would ever be normal again. Because whatever had happened there violated something fundamental about how the world was supposed to work. He dismounted. The team approached in silence. And then Thomas Harrington stepped into the first house in Cala. What he saw over the next 6 hours would destroy any certainty he had ever held about reality. Before we keep diving into this mystery that still has no explanation to this day, hit like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the unexplained cases I bring here. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I want to know how far this story is reaching. The first house belonged to the Quispa family, according to the records Harrington would later find in the church. A weathered wooden door, half open, creaking softly in the wind. He pushed it. The door swung fully open without resistance. Inside, dim light cut by thin beams of sun coming through the small windows. The strong smell of cooked quinoa. And silence. Silence so deep, Harrington could hear his own blood pulsing in his temples. A table stood in the center of the room. 6 ceramic plates, quinoa soup in each one, with pieces of potato and meat floating in the still greasy broth. Cornbread split in half, clay cups half filled with water. 6 chairs, 4 pulled back from the table, as if people had stood up in the middle of the meal. 2 still pushed in, their plates untouched. Harrington stepped closer, touched one of the plates, still warm. Not hot enough to have just come off the fire, but warm, as if it had been served an hour, maybe 2 hours earlier. He looked around. No flies, no insects on the food, as if even insects knew they weren't supposed to touch it. In the adjoining room, 3 beds, 2 full-size, 1 child's. Blankets pulled aside, rumpled. Pillows with deep impressions still pressed into the fabric. A child's dress hanging on the back of a chair, neatly folded. Shoes lined up at the foot of the bed, socks still tucked inside, rolled as if someone had just taken them off. And no sign of haste, no drawers pulled open, no clothes scattered. It was as if the 6 members of the Quispe family had simply evaporated in the middle of their lives. Not in the middle of a flight, not in the middle of an attack, in the middle of an ordinary lunch, on an ordinary day, with nothing to suggest it would be the final moment of their existence. Martin Flores, the expedition's chief interpreter, entered the second house. He was 45 years old, born in Cusco, and had spent his life guiding expeditions through the Andes. He had seen villages abandoned by drought, by disease, by conflict, but when he stepped into that second house and saw the same scene, set table, prepared food, unmade beds, objects perfectly in place, he vomited, not from disgust, but because his mind refused to process the absence of logic. "It doesn't make sense," he kept repeating, leaning against the outside wall, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense." The expedition split up. Groups of 4 searched each block, looking for survivors, injured people, any sign of life. And in every house, the same impossible choreography. Stoves with dead embers but lingering heat. Washed clothes folded over chairs. Looms with ponchos halfway finished, knitting needles stuck into balls of yarn. Children's toys scattered on the floor. Everything paused. Everything frozen at the exact moment something had torn people out of their lives. In one house, they found a school notebook open on a table. Handwriting exercises in uneven Spanish. The last sentence written read, "My mother is cooking the soup." The ink was still wet. Harrington ran his finger across it. A blue smear. That child had written it less than 3 hours earlier. And now, where was she? Harrington ordered a search of the surrounding area. Groups spread out in a 5-kilometer radius. They combed trails, ravines, grazing land. They looked for makeshift camps, hidden groups, anything that could explain it. Nothing. The trails were empty. There were no fresh footprints beyond those left by the expedition itself. No campfires. No tracks, nothing at all to suggest human movement in recent weeks. The animals were all alive, cattle in the fields, llamas in the corrals, hungry but alive, chickens wandering freely, dogs tied up in yards, barking desperately from hunger, but not a single human being. As if something had selected only people, leaving everything else untouched. On the 3rd day, one of the engineers, Robert Enfield, found something in the church that turned confusion into terror. The building was small, thick stone walls, a wooden ceiling blackened by centuries of candle smoke. Inside, the pews were empty. But on the altar, there were 300 candles. Exactly 300. one for each resident listed in the last census. The candles had burned down to their midpoint, wax melting into rivers that ran down iron holders and pooled on the stone floor. But the church was locked, from the outside, with a thick wooden beam braced across the door. Harrington stood in front of the altar for 10 minutes trying to process it. If the candles had been lit, someone had been there to light them. But when? And how did that person leave if the door was barred from the outside? And who barred it? The embers in the stoves suggested a recent abandonment, 24, maybe 30 hours before the expedition arrived. But the candles suggested something else entirely. Premeditation, planning, preparation. How could the two coexist? Either the people had fled in the middle of lunch, or they had carefully prepared a ritual farewell. It couldn't be both, unless it was. On the fourth day, they found the cemetery. It lay 500 yards beyond the last house, surrounded by a low wall of stacked stone. Inside, 73 old graves, rotting wooden crosses, none recent. But in the center of the cemetery was an area of disturbed earth. Fresh, dark, as if someone had dug there within the last few hours. Harrington ordered it excavated. They dug 1 meter, 2, 3. Found nothing. No bodies, no objects, no explanation for the disturbed soil. Just dark, damp earth, smelling of something Harrington couldn't identify. Not decay. Something older, like wet stone deep inside a cave that had never seen light. And beside the disturbed ground, planted in a perfect circular formation, stood 300 small wooden crosses, each about 8 inches tall, and carved into each one, with knife-precise care, was a name. Flores checked them. They matched the church records exactly. 300 names, 300 residents. As if someone had prepared a memorial in advance for people who were not yet dead, or who had never died, because there were no bodies. That night, camped in the village's central square, none of the men slept well, not from fear of attack or visible danger, but from something deeper, the sensation of being watched, not by human eyes, by something paying attention from a place with no physical location. Some of the Peruvian workers refused to sleep inside the empty houses. They pitched tents outside, despite the brutal cold at that altitude. They said the houses remembered the people who had lived in them, and that memory was too heavy, too dense, like trying to breathe underwater. And then, on the 5th day, they found the school. And what was inside turned the mystery into something none of them would ever forget. Kala's school consisted of a single classroom, whitewashed adobe walls, damp stains creeping up from the floor like gray fingers, 23 wooden desks arranged in 3 uneven rows, a blackboard at the front, the last lesson still written in white chalk, the conjugation of the verb to be in Spanish. Yo soy tú eres él, Ella as the chalk rested on the ledge. The eraser lay beside it, white dust still fresh in its fibers. Everything was in place. Everything was normal. Except for the absence of the 23 children who should have been there. It was Martín Flores who found the cabinet at the back of the room, locked with a simple padlock. He forced it open with an iron bar. The lock gave way with a dry snap. Inside, stacked with obsessive care, were 23 school notebooks, faded cardboard covers, some with students' names written in pencil. Flores picked up the first one, opened it, looked at the first page. His breath caught. The page was filled with the same sentence repeated in perfect lines, in careful childlike handwriting. We must not go. 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 He turned the page. The same sentence. Turned another, and another. 43 pages. All filled. The same sentence. No variation, no spelling errors, no corrections. As if the child had written it until their hands hurt, until their fingers bled, until the mind simply shut down. Flores dropped the notebook to the floor as if it had burned him. Harrington picked up another, opened it. The same thing, page after page. But the handwriting was different. Another child, another hand, another pressure on the paper. He opened a third. The same sentence, different handwriting again. a fourth, a fifth, a sixth. 23 notebooks, each written by a different child. All repeating the same obsessive sentence hundreds of times, as if they had been forced to copy an endless punishment. Enfield, who had 3 children in London, sat down at one of the desks and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, but he made no sound. He was breathing deeply, trying not to imagine his own children sitting there, writing that sentence, knowing that something was coming. Harrington took the notebooks back to camp. That night he and Flores examined them more carefully by lantern light. The ink was the same in all of them, common iron gall ink, produced locally. The handwriting varied, but the size of the letters was unnervingly uniform, as if the children had been instructed to maintain a precise standard, letter by letter, line by line, page by page, and on the final pages of every notebook, without exception, there was a drawing, the same drawing, a mountain with an irregular peak. And at the top of the mountain, a perfectly symmetrical circle. Flores recognized it immediately. Nevado Amparo, an inactive volcano about 90 miles from Cala, a sacred mountain to the Inca, a site of ritual sacrifices at impossible altitudes. But Cala had no direct historical connection to Amparo. It was too far away. So why would 23 different children draw it? From the same angle? With the same proportions? With the same circle at the summit? As if they had all seen the same thing, or as if the same thing had shown itself to them. On the 6th day, as they were packing their equipment to leave, one of the workers found something buried behind the school, a rusted metal box about the size of a small suitcase. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a journal. It was written in archaic Spanish, in a trembling hand. The journal belonged to a priest named Sebastian Vargas, who had served the Church of Cala between 1889 and 1910. Harrington opened it to the first page. Dated January 3, 1889. A mundane entry about the first Mass celebrated in Cala. He flipped through pages, baptisms, marriages, descriptions of local festivities, complaints about the cold, nothing unusual, until August of 1910. From that point on, the tone changed. Drastically. August 15th, 1910. The children no longer want to play outside. They say there is something in the mountains, something that watches. I tried to calm them with prayers, but all of them described the same sensation. A weight on the chest, as if the air were becoming denser, as if something invisible were drawing closer. September 3rd, 1910. Doña Caridad Quispe came to the church today in tears. She says her husband went out yesterday to check on the llamas and returned different. He no longer speaks. He only stares north, toward Ampato. When she tries to speak to him, he does not respond. He simply keeps looking, as if waiting for something, or listening to something no one else can hear. October 22nd, 1910. 12 people now, all with the same behavior. They stop whatever they are doing and stare fixedly to the north. They remain like that for hours. When I speak to them, they do not answer. Their eyes are open but empty, as if they are looking through me, not at me. I prayed for guidance, but God remains silent, and that silence frightens me more than any answer. Harrington turned the page. The handwriting was deteriorating, letters larger, shakier, some words smeared as if the priest had written while crying. November 10th, 1910. I called a meeting in the church. Half the village did not come. Those who did were changed. I cannot explain how. Physically, they are the same faces, same clothes. But there is something in their eyes, a hollowness. As if something has emptied out everything that made them human and put something else in its place. We prayed together. But when I finished the prayer, they kept their eyes closed, and they began to whisper, all at once. The same thing. It was not words. It was a sound, like wind passing through a narrow tunnel. December 2nd in 1910. They are building something, in the cemetery. They work at night. They use no tools. They dig with their hands. I tried to ask what they were doing, but they do not answer. They just dig, and dig, and dig. Their hands bleed, their nails tear off, but they continue, as if pain no longer means anything. I saw children digging beside their parents, children 6, 7 years old, their little hands covered in blood, and none of them cried. December 18th, 1910. The candles, 300 candles, they appeared on the altar during the night. No one admits to placing them there. But everyone knows what they are for. I do not know how I know this, but I do. They are for marking, for counting, for preparing. One candle for each of us, as if something needs to be certain of the exact number. December 31st, 1910. I tried to leave today. I took my horse and rode toward Arequipa at dawn. 3 hours later, I was back in Cala. I cannot explain it. I do not remember turning around. I do not remember deciding to return. But I did. As if something had pulled the reins without my noticing. I tried again in the afternoon. The same thing. And again at dusk. I always return. I always end up in the same square. As if Cala has closed around us and now there is no exit. The final entry was dated January 8th, 1911. The handwriting was nearly illegible. Large, childish letters, as if the priest had lost fine motor control. January 8th, 1911. They are no longer themselves. They walk, they eat, they sleep. But they are no longer themselves. Something has hollowed them out and placed something else inside. I see it in their eyes. There is nothing human left there. Only acceptance, resignation. They know they will be taken, and they will not resist, because they no longer want to resist. Tomorrow I will try again. I will run. I will scream. I will do anything to leave this place, because I know what comes next. I have seen it in my dreams. A door opening at the top of the mountain, and all of us walking toward it, without hesitation, without looking back. After that entry, the pages were blank. The journal ended there. The expedition reached Arequipa on March 28, 1911. Of the 43 men who had departed, 41 returned. 2 vanished during the journey back, an engineer named Peter Walsh and a Peruvian laborer named Esteban Lira. Both disappeared on the same night, when the group camped about 37 miles from Cala. They went to sleep in their tents. By morning, the tents were empty. Their belongings were still there. Boots, backpacks. Even their pocket watches lay on top of the sleeping rolls. Both stopped at the exact same time. 2:47 a.m. No one had heard a sound. Harrington wrote the official report the following week. 17 typewritten pages. He attached Father Sebastian Vargas's journal, 12 of the school notebooks, and photographs of the empty houses and the church filled with candles. He personally delivered everything to the provincial governor in a closed-door meeting. The meeting lasted 7 hours. When it ended, Harrington and the survivors signed a confidentiality agreement. Nothing they had seen could be disclosed. No articles, no interviews, no mention of Kekela. Violation would result in imprisonment. The materials they had brought back, the journal, the notebooks, the photographs, were confiscated. The report was sealed in a vault in Lima. The official order was clear. No new expedition would be sent. Sakala was to be avoided, forgotten, erased. Robert Enfield returned to England 3 months later. He tried to resume his life, but developed chronic insomnia. He said that every night, at exactly 2:47 a.m., he woke with the absolute certainty that something was standing beside his bed, watching him. In 1913, he was committed to a sanatorium after attempting to claw out his own eyes. He died there in 1917. In his final months, during violent episodes, he repeated the same sentence over and over. They're coming back. All of them. At once. Martin Flores never worked as a guide again. He returned to Cusco and locked himself inside a house on the outskirts of the city. Neighbors said he spent his nights drawing. Always the same image. A mountain with a circle at the summit. He covered entire walls with it. He used charcoal, paint, and when materials ran out, his own blood. In 1920, Flores disappeared. His house was found empty. All doors and windows were locked from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry. Martin simply ceased to exist, in the same way the 300 residents of Cala had. Thomas Harrington was the only one who tried to go back. For 13 years, he lived a normal life. He returned to London, accepted the university position, married, had 2 children. But every night before sleep, he closed his eyes and saw the same thing. The empty village, silent houses, 300 candles burning on the altar, and the feeling that he had left something unfinished. In July of 1924, he told his wife he needed to travel to Peru for work, a brief consulting job, 3 weeks at most. She didn't suspect anything. He had taken similar trips before. Harrington went alone. He didn't request authorization. He didn't inform authorities. He boarded a ship to Lima, took a train to Arequipa, bought a horse, and headed for Cala. He brought maps, compasses, coordinates he had secretly kept. He also brought a new camera. This time, he would document everything. This time, he would prove what he had seen. 3 weeks later, the horse returned to the city by itself. No Harrington, no equipment, just the animal, exhausted, eyes wide with terror, dried foam crusted around its mouth. Strapped to the saddle with a leather thong was a single photograph. The image showed Cala, the village exactly as it had been found in 1911. Houses intact, streets empty, and in the center of the main square stood a human figure, back turned to the camera. Wearing the same clothes Harrington had been wearing when he left, the photograph was anonymously delivered to the British Embassy in Lima. Copies were sent to 3 newspapers in London. 2 were intercepted before publication. The third reached the Times, which printed a brief notice in December 1924. The edition was recalled hours later, officially due to a printing error, but the photograph circulated. And when enlarged, it revealed something that hadn't been clear in the original image. The figure in the center of the square cast no shadow. The sun was high. Every building around it threw sharp shadows across the stone ground. But the human figure did not, as if it were not solid enough to block the light. There was another detail, one that caused Harrington's wife to faint when she saw the photograph for the first time. The figure was looking back over its shoulder. The face was too blurred to make out features, but one thing was unmistakable. It was smiling. Thomas Harrington was never officially declared dead, only missing. His wife waited 5 years before holding a symbolic funeral. In the empty coffin, she placed just one thing, the last letter he had sent from Arequipa, 3 days before leaving for Cala. It read, "I need to see it again. I need to be sure it was real, because if it wasn't, then I'm insane. And if it was, then the world is far more terrifying than anyone imagines. Either way, I need to know." He found out, but he never came back to tell anyone.
In 1957, 46 years after Cala, it happened again. A village called Ticrapo, about 112 miles away. 120 residents. One September morning, a traveling merchant passed through the area and found the place empty. The same scene, the same orderly houses, the same food left on tables, and in the cemetery, 120 new crosses, each with a name carved into it. The Peruvian government called it a spontaneous evacuation.
There was no public investigation, no forensic work. Ticrapo was officially repopulated with families from other regions, but no one stayed more than a few months. People said the houses remembered those who had lived there before, and that memory was too heavy to bear. But a geologist named Hernan Parra, who had climbed Nevado Ampato months before the event, began connecting the dots. He had seen something at the summit of the mountain. A circular structure made of black, polished stones, arranged with geometric precision, and at the center of the circle, a hole, perfectly round, descending vertically into solid rock, a depth impossible to measure. When he dropped a stone into it, He heard no impact. The rock fell in absolute silence, as if it had been swallowed by a void that did not obey physics. Carved into the stones of the circle were symbols. Symbols he copied into a notebook before collapsing with an unbearable headache. Symbols he later found drawn in ash on the floor of Tikrapo's church. Para spent months investigating. He compiled historical records, and he identified a horrifying pattern. Approximately every 46 years, a community vanished in the Andes, always within a specific zone, always in places with direct visual access to Nevado Amparo. Like a clock, like a mechanism. Like something operating in precise, regular, inevitable cycles. In March of 1958, Para presented his findings at a closed meeting of the Peruvian Geographical Society. He showed maps, documents, photographs of the symbols. He explained the geographic connection to Amparo. A military officer stood up and said it was dangerous speculation, that Para needed to stop immediately. Para refused. 2 months later, he disappeared. His car was found abandoned 3 kilometers outside the city, key still in the ignition. Inside the glove compartment was a photograph. It showed Para standing on the summit of Amparo, beside the stone circle, staring directly into the camera. But Para had not climbed Amparo again. His family confirmed it. His colleagues confirmed it. He had been in Arequipa, teaching classes, living normally, until he vanished. The photograph was impossible, but it existed, and the pattern continued. 46 years after Tikrapo, a community called Yanama, in the province of Yungay. 87 residents, all gone in a single night. Authorities called it an evacuation due to landslide risk. But there was no evidence of landslides, and investigators who reached the site found 87 new crosses in the cemetery. No one officially connected Yanama to Kala or Tikrapo. They were treated as coincidences. Rural villages sometimes emptied out. It happens, but always at the same interval. Always with the same pattern. Always within the line of sight of Nevado Amparo. And now, doing the math reveals something that freezes the blood. The next event is projected for 2049, 24 years from now. There are communities living in that region right now, small, isolated, but alive. And perhaps at this very moment, children in some remote Andean school are already filling notebooks with the same sentence. Perhaps adults are already staring north without knowing why. Chala was never repopulated. The houses are still there, intact, empty, doors hanging open, creaking in the wind, roofs whole, not a single tile out of place, as if time stopped on March 14, 1911, and never started again. Local shepherds avoid the area. They take detours of miles to avoid passing nearby. When asked why, they don't explain. They only say, "That place doesn't want visitors," but some have gone anyway. Curious travelers, thrill seekers, paranormal investigators. Reckless tourists chasing adrenaline. Most return the same day. They say they can't stay, not because of anything they see, but because of a growing pressure. As if the air becomes heavier with every passing minute. As if something invisible is drawing closer. As if Kakala is waiting for you to complete a number. And when that number is reached, something happens. Some never return. In 1978, 3 university students from Lima went to Kakala with cameras and recording equipment. They wanted to make a documentary. They camped in the central square, set up tents, cooked food. 2 days later, other hikers found the camp. The tents were still there, food prepared, cameras neatly arranged on an improvised table. But the 3 students were gone. The cameras held unexposed film. Nothing had been recorded, as if they had arrived, set everything up, and then immediately ceased to exist. In 1995, a French journalist traveled to Kala alone. He brought GPS equipment, a satellite phone, and a professional camera. He told his editor he would stay 3 days. On the 3rd day, the editor tried to make contact. No response. A search team was sent. They found the journalist sitting in the middle of the church, alive, conscious. but unresponsive. He only stared at the empty altar, at the place where the 300 candles had once stood. They brought him back to civilization. He was committed to a psychiatric hospital in Lima. He never spoke again. He lived 17 more years in absolute silence. He did only one thing, over and over. He drew the same image, a mountain with a circle at the top. In 2015, a team of geologists received official permission to study rock formations near Kakela. 5 researchers. They camped about a mile away from the village. They never entered it. They only took measurements around the perimeter. On the second night, all of them woke up at the same time, 2:47 a.m. All of them described the same thing, the sensation of hearing footsteps, many footsteps, hundreds of people walking toward the camp. But when they turned on their flashlights, there was nothing there, only wind, and the visceral certainty that if they stayed one more night, they would not leave. They packed up before dawn. There are reports from shepherds who claim to see lights in the village at night, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. Candlelight flickering in the windows of empty houses, as if someone inside were lighting them one by one. Some say that if you get close on those nights, you can hear voices, low, muffled, as if coming from very far away. Conversations in Quechua, children laughing, the sounds of ordinary life, pots clattering, doors opening and closing, footsteps on stone streets. But the moment you step inside, everything stops. And the silence that replaces the sounds is worse than any scream. Because it is a silence that waits, that watches, that counts. In 2018, a drone flew over Kala as part of an archaeological mapping project. The footage showed the village perfectly preserved from above. Intact houses, clear streets, the church at the center. But there was something in the images that should not have been there. In the main square, filmed from above, were 300 shadows, perfectly circular, arranged in a precise geometric formation, as if 300 people were standing there, looking up at the drone. But there was no one there, only the shadows. The drone operator tried to explain it away as a processing error, a digital artifact, a camera malfunction. But when other frames were analyzed, the shadows were still there, always in the same positions, always 300 of them, as if something in Kala casts a shadow without having a body. Nevado Ampado is still there, visible on the horizon. The stone circle is still at the summit. The hole still descends into a depth no one has ever measured, and from time to time, according to unconfirmed reports, a blue light returns, pulsing, rising from deep within the earth, like a beacon, like a signal, like coordinates being transmitted to something waiting on the other side. The pattern has never been broken, not in 1911, not in 1957, not in 2003, and there is no indication it will be broken in 2049. Because Kala is not just a place where people disappeared. Kala is an entry point, an address, a coordinate in a geography that does not use latitude or longitude, but something older, something that existed before humans learned how to make maps. And every 46 years, that address becomes active again. The door opens, and something, or someone, passes through. Sakala remains empty today. If you have the courage to go there, you will find the same houses Thomas Harrington found in 1911. The same tables, the same rooms. Everything preserved in a way that should be impossible after 114 years of abandonment. Some say that if you stay there at night, between 2 and 3 in the morning, you can hear footsteps, muffled voices, as if the 300 people are still there, living their routines, trapped in an eternal loop between existing and not existing. But no one stays to confirm it. Because there is something in Kala that your body understands before your mind can process it. You should not be there, not because it is dangerous, not because it is haunted, but because that place is waiting, counting, and when the right number is reached, when the cycle completes again, when the date arrives, the door will open. And this time, it may not be in a remote village in the Andes. It may be somewhere you know, or somewhere you live, because the pattern is accelerating. The intervals are shrinking. And there are investigators who believe Kala is not the only entry point, just the first one that was documented. There are others, scattered, waiting, and they all share the same trait. When people disappear, they leave everything behind, as if their lives were simply paused for a second and never unpaused. At this exact moment, somewhere in the world, a child may be sitting in a classroom, writing the same sentence hundreds of times without knowing why. At this exact moment, someone may be staring at the horizon, feeling a growing weight in their chest, a sense that they need to go. They don't know where, only that they must. And at this exact moment, in Kala, the wind moves through empty houses. Doors creak, shadows shift, and 300 candles wait on the altar, ready to be lit again. Because 114 years ago, something established a pattern in Kakala, and that pattern was never interrupted. It only waits. And when you look at the dates, the cycles, the maps, you realize something that chills the blood. We are not investigating what happened to those people. We are simply counting down the time until it happens again. And maybe it already has.